Hello and welcome to everyone. This is another edition of our Innovation on the Frontline webinar series where we talk about the leaders and the change agents driving a disruption in the field service domain. My name is Prateek Chakravarti. I'm the CEO of Zinier, and I'm really excited and pleased to welcome Upal Basu. Upal is an entrepreneur, a global investor with NG Capital. Great gentleman, great guy. I've had the pleasure of knowing Upal for several years now and very excited to talk about digital transformation, innovation through his lens. So Upal, welcome to our webinar series today.
Well, thank you, Prateek and team, and thank you for the kind introduction. Looking forward to sharing whatever is helpful to the team.
Great, Upal. So Upal, I wanted to start off with your transition to entrepreneurship. You have a stellar resume, and I've told this to you before: Imperial College, Stanford, HBS, McKinsey, and then about 2 decades back, at the heart of 3G revolution, you set up your company, the largest mobile device management platform. What brought you to entrepreneurship? What brought you to 3G? Curious to hear about your story and journey, and what were the lessons learned and what excited you back then?
Yeah, so I would say 2000, interestingly, for those who may not be aware, has many parallels to right now. There was a boom in technology, the dot-com boom. And when I was in my consulting gig, we were all antsy about joining or creating the next technology company. And a lot of my classmates were choosing to go into the next internet company. And I took a step back and I asked the question, well, that's the obvious thing everyone's doing. What's the next big thing which is going to hit the world? And it was apparent to me it's going to be mobile, and it's going to be the computer and mobile phone coming together. And at that time, only BlackBerry was really building a data-centric solution. For those who know what BlackBerry was, it was basically an email device. And it became obvious to me that these kind of devices will proliferate, and in future, the computer and the phone will merge. And by the way, it was not appreciated much at that time because I came to the conclusion that the computer and the phone will come together and there'll be infinite bandwidth for people to talk on the phone and check the internet on the phone. Most people didn't believe me, including some of the best investors. And the problem I tried to solve was that I felt if laptops are hard to manage and PCs are hard to manage in a corporate environment, think about millions of devices floating around the world with your corporate information. How would an IT department know what's going on in these devices? How would they fix them, patch them, bring them up to standards, secure them if the employee left it on the train? That was always the use case I talked about. What if a banker left their BlackBerry on the train? What would happen to it? And nobody could answer the question. And so I came up with this idea of we used to call it wireless device management. It was, we pioneered the idea. We said these devices need to be managed. And basically me and the co-founder from Bell Labs decided to start it on that basis. Now, on your first question, what made you want to be an entrepreneur? I would just say, at some point in your life, you say, okay, let me take a bet and let me try to see if I can make a big difference. I can always take the safe path in life. And so, some of it was rationally done and some of it was really an emotional bet that this is the right time to do it.
Yeah. So wireless device management back then, game changing, right? And I'm sure, as you mentioned, Upal, you had to convince investors, you had to convince people to come and join this journey of yours. How challenging was it? Were you always clear that, hey, this is coming and I have a very clear vision where this will go? Or were there moments during your journey in the early years you're wondering why not an IT company? Tell us a bit about the creation of a category as a part of your journey.
Yeah, so this is a very good point. I would say if you're right and if you're too early, that's relatively, it's indistinguishable from being wrong. So in some respects, you may be right, but you may make the call too early. And I felt we made the call a bit too early. So what happened was the 3G licensing started in 2000. So we naturally assumed that the world would be awash in smartphones within 2, 3 years. It was very interesting that the first response to BlackBerry did not come till iPhone came along in 2007. And so there was a bit of a wasteland during the middle. We had a recession, we had 9/11, unfortunately. So the naughty decade, as they call it, was not a great time to be investing in technology. And most companies basically cut back on their spending. And only towards 2005 and 6 was there a final recognition that the internet and the mobile phone were colliding. So we were right. My thesis was right. I was dogged in my determination to build this company. But there were many years in the middle when I was wondering, what was I doing here? But I think it was interesting. We had flat revenues for 4 years, and then we had a massive spike. Our revenues went from literally 1 to 20 million in 1 year, when Vodafone became our first large customer. And after that, we won many customers and many large accounts. But as I said, sometimes you may be a bit too early, and that was probably my biggest challenge. And then raising funds during that time was very different because the many, even though we were not in the dot-com space, um, most venture funds had become very risk averse at that time, and so it did not matter what was getting backed, whether it was a Salesforce or us or somebody else. The market just was not as excited about backing them. So we went through that and we got to the other side, but it wasn't an easy journey.
Yeah. So you mentioned the investing funding environment was very different 20 years back. So how did you start? Were you guys bootstrapping? Did you find any anchor investors early on? How long did that process take to find the right investors?
So I was very fortunate that a hedge fund, a friend of mine who was a senior portfolio manager at a hedge fund, gave us $1 million, pretty much based on trust and the fact he was my classmate. And that really set us going, because $1 million at that time was perceived as a reasonable amount of money. And there was no cloud computing, so we had to actually spend most of that money just buying rack servers. And for those of you, just to give you some background, it cost $60,000 a month to get a T1 line to get into the internet. And AT&T took 3 months to provision that line. And it cost $1 million to get a rack of servers to run your compute and then push it over the T1 into the internet. So just to become an entrepreneur, it cost you $1 million to get started. Now you can start with $60, your Comcast account, and everything's online. So you can just see how much more friction there was in 2000 to get a business going. But we got the money, and we got some real top investors in Boston, Battery Ventures and Northbridge Ventures to back us. And look, the good news was these investors, they stuck with us through the hard times. And then we got investors from Israel, we got Intel Capital, we got Visa even interested, as they consider device management as something valuable for payments on mobile. So we raised over $65 million in our first 8 years, which was quite a significant amount in those days, and certainly for a New York-based company.
Great. Looking back, Upal, anything you would have done differently? You had a great exit, good outcome. Building a company, starting a company, I say always challenging. You had a good journey at the right time. The sector picked up. Would you have done anything differently? And where I'm going with this is any advice for budding entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I have two advice. One is choose your co-founders carefully. The reason is not friends don't necessarily make great co-founders. We had 3 founders. One I had to let go. Founders need to complement each other. Founders need to play to their strengths and not compete for attention of the board against each other. They need to have the same long-term vision. And to me, that was my first error. I did not spend a lot of time thinking about that issue. And so my first thing would be, it's lonely to be a solo founder. So most successful companies usually have two founders, but spend at least a year or two getting to know the individual as a professional, not as a friend, before you start a business with them. The second advice I would give is the point of being right does not mean that the time is always the right time to start the same company. DoorDash, if had been created 10 years back, would have failed. Grab would have failed because you need a lot of things to come together. For our solution to work, we needed the networks to have been built out, and we needed devices on the field. When we started a company, the networks were being built out, but there was not enough 3G devices like an iPhone. So many people imitated MDM 6 years after we found it and ended up having pretty nice outcomes, even though they just copied our entire product suite, but their timing was right. So the other thing I would ask you is to see, is the demand curve there? Is the demand curve there for your product in the next 2 years? Doesn't have to be next week, but starting an esoteric company in quantum computing, for example, just on a whim is interesting, and you might even get funded. But the reality is you may be in the wilderness for a pretty long time. And so choose that, make that decision carefully. You may be fine with being in the wilderness for 5 years, and that may be fine. That may be a choice you need to make. But what I found is you have to solve the pain point of your customers immediately, ideally, if you want to scale quickly.
Yeah. I remember we caught up over lunch a few days back, Upal. We talked about Clay Christensen and his theory of what is the job to be done, right?
Yes.
You may have the best technology, best idea, but if you're not getting a job done and not solving a customer's pain point, the demand curve is not there. There is no company, there's no growth.
Yeah, Pratik, that's the other thing. I don't think any customer buys AI, blockchain. They don't even buy field service. What they buy there's a problem, there's a need, there's a job which they're trying to solve, and your software is being hired to help them accomplish that task. If there was another way to do that task, which was more elegant, they would choose that approach. And I think one of the issues in Silicon Valley is we get enamored with terminologies and words like robotic process automation, AR, VR goggles, things like that. But those are technologies. Those are not jobs. Those are not solutions per se. And I always believe that the most sustainable companies over the long terms are really focused on the customer, obsessively so. And in consumer world, we talk about Jeff Bezos obsessively focused on the consumer, but in business world, you don't see the same level of obsession. And I would say there's an opportunity here for enterprise entrepreneurs to really think obsessively about what exactly is the customer's problem.
Great. So next phase, Upal, on your journey, this is fascinating. You get acquired by Alcatel-Lucent, and you start your journey as an investor with NGP Capital. Tell us about that. Was it always the plan to become an investor and see the world from the other side? Was it more opportunistic? How was that transition?
Yeah. So after being on and a founder, CEO, and on the board of my own company, I had some quality investors on my board and some not so much. And what I found was there were some people who really were in the service business. They really wanted to help the entrepreneur succeed. And some basically were just constantly complaining and had a negative energy about, well, you missed your quarter, what's going to happen? And on constantly basically creating a little bit of a fear in the founder. And I came to the conclusion that there's a better way to do this. So I did not, to be honest, know much about the venture world even though I'd read about it, studied it as a student. But as I experienced it on the receiving side of it, both from a fundraising as well as a board member and getting to know many of these VCs, I realized there's a better way to do this. And the better way is to think, once you're in the investment, your job is to become just part of the same team. And even though you have checks and balances, as long as the company is executing or even not executing, your job is to help the company. So I wanted to do a better way. That's why I wanted to be a VC. what I didn't realize is that it is an empirical business. There's no science. The way you make decisions on which companies to invest is informed by a combination of intuition and analysis. Um, if you just work on intuition, you might get lucky, but most likely you will fail. If all you do is analysis, you'll miss the tea leaves of where the future is going to be. And so the rigor of analysis can help you stop making mistakes, but intuition and analysis together is the only way you can make a bet on the future. So and it took me a while to sort of learn that over the few years. It probably, I would say, it takes 3 to 5 years to know whether you're doing a good job. And only after that, you really know you can do this for a living. So I've been now doing it for 12 years. So I think I've sort of figured it out, but still surprises me constantly.
Good. And in your role, Upal, I'm sure you get to meet a lot of technology companies across the spectrum. Moving into field service, what excites you about the field service domain? What is it? You're a thought leader in this domain. What excites you about the potential about field service?
Yeah, so I have this thesis that that we have overserved technology to white collar workers, the desk workers like you and me. We have choices of 20 different kinds of apps to do 20 different kinds of messaging, spreadsheeting, Airtables, but we have completely neglected 3 billion workers who are deskless. And these are the people who actually get the job done. And over the last 12 months, it's become apparent whether it's the nurse, the teacher, the farmer, the retail store worker. These are the people without whom our society would stop functioning, but they are completely untechnology resourced. And the technologies they're given are given as a way to control them, to see that they are actually showing up on time management, monitoring what time they start working, what time they stop working. Those technologies which have been given to deskless workers have been really as a way to control them rather than to empower them. So in my opinion, 3 billion workers, 80% of the world's working population today is working without tools. In a world where Android phones cost less than $100, data is effectively free. And so there must be a better way. We picked on field service because it felt like an industry which is essential, not just has been around for a long time, but is done badly. Why is field service done badly? Because the way typically a field service software works is they basically take your pen and paper work and just convert into digital workflow. It's heavily customized to the need of each company. A deployment from a trial to live takes a year, sometimes more. And each time is deployed, it looks different for each customer. So the code gets changed for each large corporation. And then every time an enterprise needs to change something, they have to go back to the supplier and spend enormous amount of money on professional services to fix it again. So it creates an artificial lock-in for the customer. The vendor actually ends up basically doing tons and tons of code rework. And you get the impression that neither the customer is happy, nor is the vendor. And the employee who's actually doing the field service doesn't even benefit from the solution. As I said, it's treated like a control solution. So then I inverted the problem. I said, so exactly what is an ideal field service? So we met many companies, including some of Zinier's competitors. And it felt to us that the question needs to be asked in a different way. What makes the employee successful first, not the manager, not the procurement guy, right? Let's start with them. What is the biggest pain point in the industry? It's not that people don't want to convert pen and paper to digital. It's that they don't have the patience to wait for 2 years to get a software which is up and running. They want a product which can start running in weeks or months, right? They should be able to change it with very little effort. And they should be able to hold the vendor accountable and have the ability to perhaps cancel their contract if they're not happy about it. You want the agility and the flexibility of a service model, but you also want a product which is easy to use. But the user experience has to be extremely simple. That was the other thing, which was that if you think user experience has to be simple for white collar workers, think of these workers who are on the field, on a truck, in a store, in the heat, in the sun. these people want a product which has such simple user experience that it should really do not require any training at all, right? So we saw none of that, to be honest, in the traditional field service world. So when we started looking, we knew exactly what we were looking for. We were looking for an employee first product, a user experience which was simple, a product which does not require a lot of customization, and which can and where the customer and the vendor have a balanced relationship. So with that sort of really, it, we met Zinier, and when Axel introduced us, which is one of your larger investors, and it was a very quick decision for us because we saw that independently, Zinier's founding team had come with the same sort of set of ideas which we were looking for. So it was we literally made a decision within 2 weeks to invest in Zinier.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, Upal, putting the blue collar field workers at the center of it, figuring out, in Clay Christensen's word, what is the job to be done for them. And I wanted to latch on to another thing you mentioned early on. You see parallels in the current 5G transition to what you saw with the 3G. Can you talk a bit more about the 5G? What do you see is the future of these blue collar workers? What changes you expect in the telecom space with the 5G evolution? And what does it mean for technology companies like us, like Zinier? What are the opportunities for us?
Yeah, so what we have noticed is, and we have analyzed everything from 1G, 2G, all the way to 5G, is there's a 10-year window in which a standard dominates. So 3G dominated from 2005 to 15. 4G started dominating around mid 2010, 12, 13, 14, and it's probably going to peak by 2025. And 5G has just started. So 5G will start peaking, starting dominating around 2023, 24. And we expect 6G to come around 2030. So that cycle is actually surprisingly predictable. Now, the way there's a chicken and egg solution challenge is, first you have to build the network before people buy the devices. If you build the devices and the networks are not ready, people will not pay a premium for those phones. You will not buy a 5G phone if you don't have a 5G applications to use. So there's a chicken and egg situation. Now, having said that, for field forces, the time is now because the networks are being laid out right now. But from a consumer's point, the time is actually not right now. So for networks, 5G, the time to invest is now. Zinier's time is now. But if I was a consumer of 5G, my time is probably 2023 on, because that's when the super fast, blazingly cool apps will start taking off, right? So there's a time lag between who the consumer of these technologies is. Now, the opportunity for Zinier is not just in networking. We are also seeing just that the industrial world, everything is becoming a service. So manufacturing is becoming a service, logistics is becoming a service, utility was always a service. But for example, I was talking to somebody, electric vehicles, there's going to be millions of charging stations around the world. That's a service. And again, somebody has to maintain these charging stations. So the amount of hardware infrastructure which has to be constantly maintained and monitored is actually going to grow exponentially in the next 10 years. And 5G is just one part of that story. It's just that the way we live our lives is going to be consumed through physical infrastructure, which is all around us. And that physical infrastructure has to be maintained by somebody. And so we think when I think of 5G, I see it's a great time to be right now supporting and helping customers which are laying out these networks, both private and public, by the way. There's also a lot of private networks being built for 5G. But I think the opportunity for FeedForce goes beyond that. It gets into utility, it gets into, as I said, electric vehicles and charging stations and other kinds of use cases.
Yeah. And couldn't agree more. You mentioned a good thing, that every industry, manufacturing, logistics, electric vehicles, you're seeing the serviceization of it. It is becoming a service. How do you set up electric vehicle chargers so that it provides a service? OEMs are looking at service models of not just selling the equipment but providing the service. And I would assume with the $2 trillion infrastructure plan, we would only expect more investments, more dollars flowing into field service specific industries, and the market becoming even bigger.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And I think the challenge is that because the legacy folks in field service have been so hard to deploy, and the ROI has taken so long, there's that hurdle of skepticism one has to cross to make them want to change what they have built. So many of them are stuck with really old, low quality solutions, but because of the sunk cost fallacy and the millions of dollars they've spent, sometimes it's hard to rip and replace those old opportunities. The other thing I would say is Zinier, to the extent you guys have an API interface, there are many ways to from the edges, replace some of the functionality, which are the inferior functionality of your customers' products, and over time build a platform which benefits them. One doesn't have to, because for multiple reasons, including internal decisions which have been made, people don't want to rip out and acknowledge that they made a mistake by procuring that legacy field service solution. So instead of getting into that kind of a conversation, I would say work with that solution, surround it with better capabilities, and over time, um, improve the offering so that it's obvious to them that your solution is better. That's how Salesforces of the world became what they are. That's how AWS scaled inside organization. You have to work with the customer's needs.
Got it. And I also want to be cognizant of some of the questions coming in, Upal. I'll pick one. So on AR, VR, and IoT, these are two big buzzwords in the field service domain. What's your take on these two technologies, their space in the field service world?
Right. So as I said, customers don't buy IoT or AR. Customers have a need, a job to be done, and then they ask, is this technology going to get my job done better? So so I would actually take a step back and say what exactly, if to the extent wearing a glass allows my hands to be free and me to do a better inspection and a faster productivity. So I can inspect a base station or a smart meter quickly and capture the information quickly or fix that equipment faster, then absolutely there's a need for AR/VR. But if I can do that without the use of those glasses, I don't need that immediately. The other thing is that the sort of price curve. If to the extent AR/VR is the biggest issue with AR is right now the battery life of lenses. When you're in the field, if the battery runs out in an hour, you have to carry a big battery pack. If you're inside a factory, you can actually connect your USB cable and keep on recharging your AR/VR glasses. So there's some constraint. Let's put it this way. To us, Internet of Things is just is a term just for anything which has a hardware attached to the internet. To us, that term itself is interesting, but does not mean much. I mean, monitoring charging stations, for example, if you could argue, is basically those are Internet of Things devices. To me, a 5G base station is effectively an Internet of Things device. So field force management effectively, we are already in an IoT world. It's just we don't call it that way. But again, I would ask the question, is these technologies, the first important question I always ask is the customer's job being done better using this technology? And B, is the employee feeling empowered using it? And those are the lens through which I always ask that question before I look at the technology.
Right. So 10 years out, Upal, so we are doing this chat again. What would world look like in your view? Where do you expect the world to be from a field service, from a infrastructure perspective 10 years out? And for budding entrepreneurs, what do you think are the key opportunities if they're looking to start something now?
Yeah, so I would say there's going to be a massive acceleration in spending on the climate because of climate change concerns, and the amount of spending which the Biden administration doing, to me, is the new normal. So I think there's going to be a huge acceleration in investing in physical infrastructure, and I'm talking about everything from bridges, highways, charging stations, just rehabilitating our physical infrastructure. Our buildings will become smarter. Pretty much every service which we pay for will be available as a service. So what that means is the number of endpoints which need to be managed is going to go up by a factor of 10 or 100x. And they're not going to be laptops or PCs, they're going to be physical infrastructure. But the other hope I have is that the investment in the deskless worker is going to dramatically go up. I think because of COVID, what we realized is our workers are being asked to do manual work without the use of technology. With the price points of phones and devices dropping every year by 20-30%, in 10 years, I expect 3 million workers, even farmers in people picking strawberries in the farm will probably have a phone through which they could actually scan a strawberry and know whether it's worth picking or not, because it's basically free to offer that service. Manufacturing factory workers will be able to use devices quickly to see whether the line is working or there's a defect on the line. So we expect workers to be much more empowered. We expect AI as an augmentation of the worker, not as a replacement of the worker, helping take out the mundane work from the workers so that the worker can focus on the more value-added judgmental tasks. And so to me, I actually feel the world's going to be in a much better place 10 years from now. And I think in some respects through technology, I certainly hope the inequality which we currently have, by giving workers access to the same quality of tools we people have in our offices, we will actually have more satisfying jobs for them and probably most likely better paying jobs for them. So certainly that's my hope. And I also am quite optimistic that with the global concerted effort, I think we'll reach peak pollution at some point. You know, the greening of the planet will probably start getting better at some point in 10 years. And for all us and our kids' sake, that's probably what we can all hope for, right?
Yeah. So 2 last questions from my side. Upal, entrepreneur or an investor? Which one gives you greater satisfaction? You've had stellar careers in both. You have to pick one. You cannot pick both. And why?
So I would say from satisfaction, emotionally, even though it's a roller coaster, I think there's nothing like being an entrepreneur or building something. Even if you're not the entrepreneur, if you're part of a team which is building something new, taking on incumbents, changing the game, it's the most satisfying. You're in the front, the highs are the highs, the lows are the lows, but you experience it every day. To me, there's nothing quite like it. So entrepreneur any day. I think the beauty of being an investor is you bask in the reflected glory and the success of many entrepreneurs. So it is intellectually satisfying to be working with 8 entrepreneurs at the same time and
Yep.
and being helpful to them, but it's never the same as actually building it yourself.
Great. Thank you, Upal. Thanks a lot. You always look forward to our chats and your advice. Fascinating. All your inputs as we continue to grow together with you. And what resonated a lot with me is, as an investor, you have been very supportive. It's all about. We know it's a roller coaster, as you rightly said, but being supportive, giving us strategic inputs, tactical inputs, and being there. I always say, as a CEO, it's lonely, but you're not alone. And we have to tap into that expertise. And you have been a great support network for Zinier, with all your inputs, advice, as an entrepreneur and investor. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for that. And really appreciate your time. Really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, so Pratik, firstly, again, thank you for you and your team for giving me this opportunity. I know you and your team are building this business thoughtfully and carefully, and I think that's the right way. I just want you guys to leave with a quote from a famous management guru, Peter Drucker, who said, the only purpose of a business is to acquire and retain a customer. That's the only reason we exist, right? And it is not growth. It's not about hitting metrics to impress vanity numbers and eyeballs. It's about satisfying your customers profitably. And so the I think that's the fundamental truth of why businesses exist. So making customers successful and retaining them. And so that's how you guys should be building your business, and that's how every entrepreneur should be thinking about building their company.
Perfect. On that profound thought, thank you all. Thank you all. And we'll see you in our next series on innovation of frontlines. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.